everyone. Welcome to Franklin County Main Street. I'm your host, Lilian Autler. And with me today is Corinna Moebius. And today, Corinna and I are going to talk about her life and work, which is related to place and how we can adapt to these times that we are living in. So welcome, Corinna.
Thank you so much. Really glad to be here.
I'm so glad to get the chance to talk to you because I'm really interested in you and the work that you do. So we'll get to that, but first I'd like to ask you a bit about your journey.
Sure.
I think that you were raised in Western Mass, is that right?
Yes, I was raised along Bay Road in South Amherst by the time I was a year old, and went to Amherst High School, and after that went to UMass. But Western Mass really shaped the person that I am, and I could tell you a little bit later about my journey after I graduated from UMass in '89. But the Valley and the amazing educational opportunities I had at Amherst High School through the Hitchcock Center and environmental education and this unique program that I got, environmental program that I was in from Canada called the Ecology Box.
Wow.
Was really transformative. Also having the opportunity to meet Chief from the Iroquois Nation, Wolf Clan, Jake Swamp, who planted what is now the tallest white pine, I think in all of Massachusetts, and having him come and speak at the high school and having this personal conversation with him. These were all sort of amazing experiences that I got to have, I think, because I was living in this unique valley of, Western Mass.
What was the Ecology Box?
Ecology Box was just amazing. I participated in it. I think it was a 3-week period in 8th grade. You had to apply to become part of it. And basically an entire gym was transformed into these different micro-environments. So you had a tent in one area and certain rules of being very quiet over here, and then there was a traditional classroom, and then there was an artsy space, and then you could go outside. There was like a library space. And we were doing these independent environmental projects, learning about the land, the history of the land, the eco-history, the indigenous history. This is in like the early 80s, so it was really kind of ahead of its time. But at the same time, we were allowed to do this independent research. So here I am, an 8th grader, and we didn't take any math, science, English, or social studies classes during this time. It sort of replaced that traditional education. And I'm going to town hall by myself and looking at property records and interviewing the owner of the land, and then we could present in different formats. So it was just it really imbued an ethic of environmentalism and sensitivity to looking at the land in a different kind of way than maybe in traditional educational system. And I had great science teachers. I was able to take classes in environmental, alternative energies and things like that in high school. And so
wow, I'm jealous.
Yeah, but it really imbued this commitment to the living earth at a young age.
So those were some of your formative years in this area in Western Massachusetts, and then what?
So I at UMass, I also had a unique experience because they have a bachelor's degree with individual concentration, and I had become so interested in the environment and in place, but I was also interested in people and culture. And I was very involved in the arts, and I'd had an opportunity as a principal horn player in the Young People's Symphony of the Springfield Symphony Orchestra to go on to travel abroad, and people were calling me the cultural ambassador. So I was like, people in place. What major at UMass can I take? So I was a double major with anthropology and geography, and then I thought maybe I'll work for National Geographic. Let's add journalism into the mix. And I kept kind of combining all these majors with an idea of what I wanted to study. And I eventually was able to get a bachelor's degree with individual, like a design your own major kind of a thing. But then I left Western Mass, moved to the other side of the country, Southern California, and thus began an adventure that led me to where I am today. And I've lived and moved about 30 times, living in all kinds of circumstances, living in trailer parks, living in barrios, living with friends, having a house, losing a house, many different kinds of circumstances. But I was in California for a while, got very involved in activism over there in the Chicano rights movement. I marched in the March of Resistance across the U.S. border in 1992. And I was making all these connections there. I started back in the 90s, started doing a lot of research on race and place. That's what was piquing my interest. And that has continued to this day. But I had experience, I left California in 98. I was moved to Washington, D.C. I was doing consulting around public participation and inclusive decision-making around land use and neighborhoods and making sure, diverse populations were at the table when things were happening to their neighborhoods. Then I moved to Miami. I spent 15 years in Miami. I became very involved in Little Havana. I co-authored a book about Little Havana, and I have a second book coming out about Little Havana. And but looking at race and in the Cuban community there, and these and place and how, and I started leading walking tours there, and that really influences the work that I do today and my strong belief in teaching through walking. I guess if I could tie that to this early experience with the ecology box, where they were really trying to see, like, where did we gravitate towards of these different spaces in the gym, and then learning outside and learning through field trips. I started teaching through walking tours that were very different. I was challenging these dominant narratives in Miami's case of this idea of worthy immigrants versus unworthy immigrants, what's called the Cuban success story. And I was trying to help people sort of unpack, like, how do these dominant narratives get made that affect how we even think about ourselves and our own identities and our sense of home and our sense of belonging? And how do people creatively interrogate that? How do people push back on to be able to tell their own stories and to find their own belonging? But I was teaching that through the experience of walking, seeing these places and having people kind of think about the initial conclusions they might have when they're visiting a certain place or a type of place. And then you ask questions and you help people start to shift their orientation. So all of a sudden they're looking at the same place. It hasn't changed necessarily, but all of a sudden you're literally seeing it in a different kind of a way. And from that I really said to myself, I want to continue teaching. I don't like teaching. I've taught in college level. I've got my PhD in Miami at Florida International University as a cultural anthropologist. But I just said, I really believe in, again, teaching through this movement where we are learning from the places that we're in. And I can tie in that sensitivity and that deep awareness of the web of life and the living earth. But the critical thing, understanding power and understanding why places are designed to put us sort of into the matrix, to get us to only see things in a particular kind of way, only see home in a particular kind of way, belonging in a particular kind of way, doesn't make you very adaptable when you're going through times like we're in now.
Yes, fascinating. And who who was your audience for these this teaching through walking? Was it people who were coming from the outside, or people who were already rooted in that place?
People from all over the world. I had everything from local K-12 schools, from disenfranchised schools, to students from universities in Germany, to journalists, international journalists covering immigration issues, to activists, community activists locally from all parts of the United States. I had mayors, I had bankers doing things with the Community Reinvestment Act. I mean, it was really a diverse. I just was flown to Miami last week, and I was doing an all-day walking workshop for global educators, so people from all across the United States who were in Miami for a conference who do study abroad programs. And so this was really meant to help them not repeat the single story of places and people when they take students to different places. How can you teach kids to be critical thinkers?
Right.
To challenge that.
Right. So yeah, I'd like to explore some of those ideas about people and place and belonging a little more. In some of your materials, you ask these questions, or you pose these questions. Where do I belong? Where is home? You mention the concept of individuals and communities navigating solastalgia, a word that I love, and displacement and societal upheaval. Can you talk a little bit more about, well, first of all, if you could define some of those terms for us, like solastalgia, and talk a little bit more about how those questions resonate with you. Where do I belong? Where is home?
Sure. Well, ever since leaving Massachusetts, Western Mass, I have lived all those years up to now, moving back last fall, in mostly immigrant communities. And so I've been around people experiencing different kinds of displacement, being refugees or immigrants fleeing their country, leaving their country for different reasons, but also sometimes having to navigate moving from this place to this place to this place to this place, even within the newly adopted city, but also folks dealing with gentrification, with being forced to move from beloved neighborhoods. They might be, have lived in that neighborhood for generations, and all of a sudden they can't afford it. And also folks dealing with development, in Miami and in DC, you'd have, the park space or the beautiful trees, and all of a sudden they're being chopped down and another development's going up, and you didn't have any say in that. So I've listened to a lot of these stories of like this pain that people go through when they either miss a place they had to leave behind that was so tied to again, their sort of identity, their cultural identity, their personal identity, the familiar. But what solastalgia's describing is, nostalgia can be often what we think of when we are nostalgic for a place, again, that we left behind. But you don't have to move to feel like, oh my gosh, I don't recognize this place anymore. And I think a lot of people living here in the United States are feeling bad about the entire nation. Like, I don't recognize where I live anymore. And it becomes like an existential crisis, because if your identity, if you think about songs, and people tell songs and stories and artwork, and it connects to the community, or they reference particular places that matter to them, and then all of a sudden everything's so changing so rapidly. So when you have big political shifts happening, you're having climate change and ecological collapse, so that places you don't even recognize anymore, you can literally not even go back to them anymore. You're having many people moving, and people becoming nomadic, sometimes because they want to, but sometimes because they have no other choice. But to be nomadic, it creates a sort of sense of like, I don't like I used to have a familiar community. I used to know where I could go. I used to feel welcome.
Yeah.
I used to be in, but now I don't know where my place is.
Yeah.
Both like in a really kind of physical, tangible way, but also in this sort of way that relates to our identity. Like, I don't know where my place is in the world. Right. I don't even know where I'm going to go. And I think that's another key thing that's happening right now. There's a lot of fear happening. And a lot of people are thinking, I don't know if I'm going to have to move. Can I stay? You know, I've talked to friends who are Jewish who are like, I don't feel safe anymore. I would love to age in place here, but I don't know if I feel safe to be here. So, and LGBTQ folks who are having to go on like safe routes, you know, to find safe havens. So that motivated me to think about like how can we have tools, resources that can help us both quickly kind of try and connect with that sense of community wherever we are, make those linkages, those relationships, but also have that kind of balance, that ability to move and shift, and to have, and I think that requires understanding history, and it requires getting out of some of the frameworks that we have, that we think about ourselves and our identities, and I go deep into this in my workshops and my walks.
So tell us, talk a little bit about some of the approaches and strategies that you use to talk about and confront what you've been
Sure. I do plan to offer online courses. I'm going to be offering workshops at a wonderful place in Amherst called White Barn Studios, right near downtown Amherst. Also in Greenfield, I would love to offer some in-person workshops. But in my workshop, my in-person workshops, and even with my online courses, it just has to be done differently. There's the walking. There's the teaching and the walking. And it's about, I created a framework I call Correspond, the correspondence framework. And it's about being in correspondence with your environment, and it's not just about being attentive, like mindfulness walks. Okay, that's great, but this is different. It's the critical thinking matched with that mindfulness. And I often draw on the metaphor of the Moebius strip, or the Moebius strip. That's my last name, so obviously I'm going to reference it. But to me, the only way you can start to learn this sort of sense of adaptation is you have to unlearn some of this sort of matrix framework that, again, orients you to literally walk in the world in a particular kind of way, or approach different circumstances in a particular kind of way. It relates to the metaphors that we use, the language that we use, even though the mundane, everyday habits that we have. I'll give a case in point.
Can you give an example? I was going to say, if you could give an
example.
example.
So, for example, we love trees. I love trees. I'm sure you love trees. A lot of people love trees. I love trees. I'm a tree person to my core. and core respond is core hyphen respond. But the thing about trees is that the whole metaphor of the tree, which progressive folks love to call upon the tree, but the tree that metaphor has also been used for eugenics, for this idea of nationalism or ethno-nationalism, or, you know, we are the pure people rooted, and what it can do is where do immigrants fit in here? You know, where does the web of life beyond just your biological blood, these ideas of culture that are very fixed, like culture is something you possess, static, you know, that's fixed and static. So I help people look at trees differently. I help people think about the way things move, are always in movement. I help people think about themselves in relationship to air and water, but even earth. For example, we often talk about grounding, right? Well, I lived through the aftershocks of the Northridge earthquake. And when you live through aftershocks that are literally moving the ground underneath your feet, you even start thinking about earth in a different kind of way. You start to feel the aliveness in earth. So I try to do these things where we are sort of revisiting these tropes, these stories, these frameworks in a way that helps us see this sort of possibilities and this movement that can happen within us. Because I am worried about nationalistic, including fascism and things like that. I really want to help us to be mindful about how the slippery slope that we can take when we start framing things in a particular way, that if we keep going down that path, might take us where we never really wanted to go, but we've been, we were kind of taking it for granted, and we kind of ended up there. So I again, it's not traditional mindfulness. It's thinking about power. It's thinking about how places are designed, and I like to take people. You don't have to be in some fantastical, cool, unique place. You can be in a place that you take for granted.
And look at it through fresh eyes.
Exactly.
Right? Look at the world
I want
in a
you to
different
be
way.
able to literally see. You're literally seeing, feeling, sensing in a different kind of expansive way that is bridging both getting you back into your body, but also empowering that critical inquiry part of yourself.
Well, and it makes me think about, that there's been so much research and writing recently about trees and forests as being so interconnected and being part of these very, these much broader, more complex ecosystems.
They're in communication
and
with each
communication with each other, right?
So that's another thing I talk about, is if we actually look at the natural world, there's all kinds of correspondence happening. There's a communication that's happening. I'm very, I actually took a course with a very famous, her name is not coming to me right now, but one of the most famous coaches, life coaches. I was curious about it, and I took this long course, but I found it to be it was still in the sort of individualistic idea, this idea of the authentic self, that you just have to go inside, and somewhere inside is this self, and if you just dig deep enough, you can access it. And I don't like that. I want us to think more relationally, because we're always ever since we were conceived, we have been in this correspondence. We depend on each other
for survival and thriving.
And it's like going against this idea of the heroic leader who just is, going to save the day, the one person, and thinking collaborative leadership. And that's something that I really started thinking about when I was working with communities that were dealing with these issues relating to land and place. And sometimes you can't be just in reaction to what's happening. Sometimes you have to be proactive with community members coming together and in ways of decision making that again are more collaborative. So all of that is woven in different kinds of ways into the work that I do.
So so now you're back in Western Massachusetts.
I am back.
And what do you hope to be able to do here? What do you hope to offer in the Valley, in Greenfield, what is your vision?
I love to teach. I want to give back. I feel like I am a creature of amazing forms of education in Western Mass. I will also say, I went to a high school where I was able to take a class in 1985 in African American literature. I mean, that was 1985. Pretty amazing. but I want to give back to this community. I want to teach what I've learned on my journey. It's like coming full circle. And interestingly enough, when I spoke to Jake Swamp, Chief Jake Swamp, he was emphasizing the circle and cycles, and he kept emphasizing that, cycles, circles. So I kind of feel like I've been on my own journey, and I'm coming in my own cycle back here to share and to learn, because that's the other thing. I do not like this idea of guru or the one person or these multi-level marketing schemes masquerading as, you know, in sort of new age forms. No, I'm a teacher, but we're learning from each other. So it's more about kind of creating a space where we can be learning from each other. We're adapting together, and I am just facilitating or guiding facilitating a way of learning that you can take with you for the rest of your life, and hopefully it's helpful to you, and you can like bring that level of awareness and critical thinking into the work that you do and share it with others in your own way.
Yeah.
You know?
And so if people would like to learn more about your work or experience it, what can they do? Yeah.
Sure, they can go to my website. It's Corinna, M as in Mary, O-E as in Edward, B-I-U-S, Moebius, or Moebius, the way I say it, .com. And I have a newsletter that they can sign up for my newsletter, and they can find out about all my upcoming workshops, whether they're in Greenfield or at Amherst or in Northampton. And if folks are interested in collaborating on a project, I really believe in collaboration, and again, sort of creating a space, see what we can manifest together. So, yeah.
Well, welcome back to Western Mass.
Thank you.
And I believe that because of your work in California and in Miami and your travels, you have also many connections with Cubans and other Latin American communities. Y que hablas español.
Hablo
¿cierto?
Español, sí, yo puedo ofrecer programas en español si hay interés.
Okay. Entonces las comunidades latinoamericanas
Claro
aquí
que sí.
en esta región también podrían interesarse
Sí,
en tu trabajo.
Claro que sí.
Great.
So,
is there anything else that you'd like to add that I haven't asked you about?
well, just that I think it's kind of cool that you were the person who interviewed me, and then we met at an Omar Sosa event.
Right.
I believe I will also add that there's an eco-spiritual aspect to what I do, in the sense that I'm open to the magic of the world, the way connections happen, and to be open to the more than human, to the web of life, and to not take that for granted, to feel grateful for these intersections that we have, and to be always learning from them.
Right.
And so I'm really I thought it was great that you were the person that was interviewing me
Right.
today.
I didn't mention that we had previously met at an event with Omar Sosa, who is a brilliant Cuban musician and composer and performer.
Florence,
and that we have, these connections to Latin America in common. And also, these questions about home and what is home really touch me very deeply. I have a lot of questions about the meaning of home and where I belong, and a longing to find my place. So, really intrigued by your work.
Well, I will say just really quickly, if there's time, that home is a key aspect of the workshops that I'm planning to offer, and I like working in all kinds of modalities. So just like there's the walking, incorporating dance. I have a long background in dance. I studied Afro-Cuban dance for 20 years, and I'm not teaching Afro-Cuban dance, but the spirit of what I learned is very influential into my attentiveness to the body and learning through the whole body, but also through art, through drawing, through journaling. So I just think that those are really helpful for the learning process, because, and I've actually taught a lot of workshops on arts and civic engagement. I continue to do so in Miami every single year, do a big workshop, actually in Broward County, because things happen through the arts that just don't come out in other kinds of ways. So I am a big believer in using the whole body, once again, all our senses for our learning.
Yeah, great. Another thing that we have in common, yes, the idea of creative expression as a form, as a big part of how we learn and interact with others. Thank you so much. I really look forward to continuing to learn more and maybe work together.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, we're going to have a cafe after this. So.